Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. All right, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host, Shane Lemaster, and we are here for episode number 98. Very special guest, Sean McAllister. How are you, sir?
Hey, Shane, doing good.
Good. So the first question is the only real standard question that I ask everybody that comes on the show, just because I really just want to hear everyone's different perspective. But the show's name is Conversations with the Mind. And I want to know, for you, when you hear that phrase, what comes up for you? What sort of meaning do you draw from Conversations with the Mind? What sort of imagery what comes out of that phrase for you?
Well, Shane, I love it. I'm going to try to have some fun today. And you certainly like to start with a small question. I mean, that's, only one of the most profound existential questions someone could be asked. So let's see if I'm up to the task. But, the truth is my entire adult life has been organized around the inquiry of the mind in terms of my intellectual pursuits, my spiritual pursuits. But the main thing that comes up is the spiritual pursuits. I started meditating 25 years ago when I moved to Colorado, part of that mid-90s immersion of yoga and other Eastern practices that were blossoming in the U.S. And I'm so grateful for the role of meditation in my life. I'm an active member of the Kadampa Meditation Center in Denver, which is a Mahayana Buddhist tradition, and I'm in teacher training right now. And so I love consciousness and the mind, and because essentially what I do in my practice is try to tame this consciousness and get it under control and stop the monkey mind, endless thoughts that are going on. And so when you ask that question, that's what really comes to mind is my meditation practice and, the deep, profound wisdom that is been conveyed for thousands of years by the Buddhist masters, starting from Buddha Shakyamuni, but on to my teachers in my lineage like Je Tsongkhapa and Manjushri and Antisha and all these great Buddhist masters. And so when I think about what does the mind or consciousness mean to me, I love the Buddhist philosophy of that science and Western culture tells us that matter creates the mind, and that mind is just it's just an automaton. It's just a machine that is, produced as a result of molecules and hormones and physical things. And in Buddhism, we say that the mind creates matter. And so, and actually what's beautiful about Buddhism is its coherency with modern science, because actually, as we've developed our science, we now know through quantum mechanics that actually, yes, the observer is impacting the observed. And this amazing reality of the living consciousness that we are manifesting in mind and spirit and soul. And the fact that what I think about with mind and consciousness all day is, okay, I need to have the right perspective and the right thinking in order to have the world that I want to have, in order to get rid of suffering for all people, and get rid of environmental disasters, get rid of injustice in the world. It starts with me. It starts with this mind that's going to manifest positive energy into the world, that's going to change the karma in the world. It's going to heal prior karma. That's going to, send forward 7 generations of healing and heal 7 generations back. And I am so empowered by the idea that the mind manifests reality. It's really restored my sense of hope and my dedication to living the right way, because the world is so big and overwhelming. It feels hopeless at times. But if you start to see that you can actually change the world through just the way that you breathe, through just the way that you think, through just the way that you perceive yourself and others, through the way that you live your daily life, the mind becomes the originating source of all things around us. And then it becomes the most empowering thing, you could imagine. And so I may have already lost your question in this rambling answer, but I really am totally animated by the life of the mind and consciousness and the spirit. So I could keep going on and on about that. I think the other thing that comes to mind is that, that really the mind and the ego is our karma, but the spirit, the thing behind the mind, that's the eternal, that's the divine. And so I'm always trying to live my life and carry out my daily life in a way that is trying to reduce that perception of separation, that perception of smallness, and remember that, behind the dark clouds of life is an eternal sky of divine nature. And so just breaking down that barrier, that's my whole, spiritual practice is about trying to really be elevated into a higher consciousness with the way I live my life and the way I treat others and the way I treat myself. And so it's probably the most important thing in my entire life. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, what a great answer to that question. I love it. And I can go so many different ways with that. First of all, what stood out to me is this idea that consciousness is primary and not secondary, right? That everything emerges from consciousness, all matter that we think, emerges from maybe not an individual consciousness, but a larger consciousness. And you're right, it is so empowering, because then when you espouse that view, you're no longer a victim to the world around you. Things are no longer happening to me, but they're happening because of me, and I have choice in that, and I have agency to change those things. And I love that empowerment perspective, and I wish more people took it. Another piece that you brought up too was that maybe it's a question that I've been considering in my own studies of consciousness, which is maybe the difference between what is consciousness and what is mind, right? And Buddhism has their own take, and here in the West, we tend to mold those two together, that the mind and consciousness are one and the same. And I think, in the big picture, everything is one and the same thing, this giant consciousness, but that the mind itself is different than consciousness. And you gave a delineation between, spirit versus ego. And that's what it reminded me of, is like the mind is sort of like this toolkit that we have. And you said, it's not a machine, but in a way, it kind of is a machine that we can manipulate and train and turn into something that helps us move through our daily lives and interact with others. But then there's this consciousness, which includes the mind, but is much greater, much more vast, sort of like the animating force behind the mind. What is your take on maybe thinking about the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and hope I have an answer to stand up to that. But what comes to mind is one thing I like to say when I meet new people, because I really feel this way, and I would say this about you right now, is if you think about it, you and we have a life force within us. It's not a consciousness. I'm sorry, it's not just a mind. So, the moment we were conceived in the womb, there was the breath of life, the spirit of life. I guess in some rudimentary sense, there might have been a mind, but that spirit, that consciousness that took hold in the very first cell of our bodies as the egg was fertilized, that is a continuity between us and our mothers and our fathers, and then their mothers and fathers. And then you take that back through evolution to other, pre-human forms of human beings. You can trace the spark of consciousness and life in you and I all the way back to the first spark of life in this iteration of this universe 15 billion years ago, or even on this planet 4.5 billion years ago. I always like to say, if you think about the miracle of us sitting here together 4.5 billion years after the first spark of life, or first spark of many forms of life, and this continuity of life for that amount of time. I mean, to even sit here with each other is like 100 lottery wins in a row. And that's one of my typical things I like to say, because it's such a miracle for us to be here in this time, this amazing time. But how it relates to your question is that consciousness, for me, that's the continuity that runs through that 4.5 billion years. If you believe in a scientific perspective of the world, just on a scientific level, there's continuity of life between us and the first spark of life billions of years ago. And there is some connection between those things. There is no separation, because there's a direct line all the way back to the beginning. And so even just on a purely scientific realm, that means that we continue to have the energy force of the first life spark on this planet. And that is another amazing miracle. But so that's the scientific view. But if you take the Buddhist perspective, which, by the way, I'm another one of these typical modern Buddhists who is sort of a hybridized Buddhist. And I'm reading a book right now about the modern Buddhism in America. And it's very different from traditional Buddhism. And it's been hybridized itself by the West and influenced by science, and it's co-opted scientific ideas. But okay, fine. But the traditional concept of Buddhism and Hinduism and other religions are that we've been reincarnated from other lives. So if you see it in the spirit sense from that Buddhist or Hindu philosophy sense, then consciousness is that recurring, recycled energy field that keeps moving, in a circular pattern into the future, into the past. It's infinite. Our consciousness, our infinite, unending consciousness in the Buddhist philosophy. They've never been born, never died. They always are. There isn't God in Buddhism. There's just mind, the consciousness and mind. Again, these are closely related, but I think consciousness is that spirit. It is that continuity between multiple lives. It is, if you just believe the science, it is that continuity between physical lives. And so, that's why I think the human mind, it's more than a sum of its parts. It's not just, when I said machine, I mean, it's not just A plus B equals C. It's an emergent quality that you take two things that you wouldn't expect, create something greater themselves, the molecules in your mind and the physical pieces. How does that create this consciousness inside of you? But I guess a better answer might be pure consciousness is not a differentiating force. Mind is a differentiating force. Mind says, this is blue, this is red. Mind says, this is good, this is bad. Consciousness is beyond division of left, right, up, down, black, white. And consciousness is that thing that encompasses all existence, all experience, all phenomenon at once. Mind is the thing that differentiates between those things. And so for me, when I'm in my practice, I'm always trying to get to consciousness where I stop needing to have words to describe something, or have judgments to judge things, or have even philosophical concepts to encompass these ideas. Because in Buddhism, we actually say, in the true, pure consciousness land, there is no Buddha. This is just a concept we need on this planet to have, some sense of the wisdom and teachings that there was an enlightened being. But true consciousness is formless, it's infinite, it's empty. At the same time, it's bliss. This is the key insight to Buddhism, is that reality is bliss and emptiness together. And so that means that, there is no delineation between good and bad. Everything is just a natural result of cause and effect, and karma over eons. And so that's how I think about the difference between consciousness is the infinite, the pure, the undifferentiated. Mind is the discerning mind that's deciding, what is good, what is bad. And, I would say mind has been a great tool for this version of humanity in this time and place. We've done amazing things, but we've shown the limitations of mind, that over-reliance on just mind is a road to misery. Because I know I'm a product of Western culture, and I want to differentiate things and judge things and make things better and fight. And there's a place for all that, but but look at the broad spread mental illness and suffering in our societies because we're so in the mind, you know. Um, so that's a long answer to say there is an important difference there, and I'm definitely obsessed with the spirit and consciousness because I'm worn out by the mind. The mind has worn me out. I'm ready for some pure consciousness.
Yeah, true. Yeah, here in the West, we seem to put the mind at least the intellectual mind up on a pedestal, and put, our gut brain and our
Yes.
intuition and instinct on lower levels, which, in most other parts of the world, it's the exact opposite. Man, your answers are fantastic today so far. I have to say, I loved the piece about how much of a miracle, how magnificent it is that we are here and able to talk to each other the way we are. I constantly think about all the forces that we even know about, all the science and physics forces that we know about, that it takes for all the atoms and molecules within our own body systems to
Yes.
hold themselves together in the body that we inhabit, and to recycle themselves every 7 years, and to change and to grow, and how amazing those forces are, and how we don't tend to give them enough respect. I love how you talked about consciousness being sort of this thread since the beginning of what we would consider time. And in a way, I think it can be similar to just, describing it as energy, an animating energy. You can't destroy or create energy. It just transfers, right? And it transfers between lifetimes. It transfers from the mother to the child, all these pieces that you talked about. And then also you were talking about, when you were talking about the scientific vein, these attractor forces. And again, we know from basic science and chemistry that certain chemicals and molecules and electrons and protons and things like that are attracted or repelled away from each other. And again, brings me back to just how amazing it is that the cells in my body, the trillions of cells in my body, have found a way to attract each other and hold them in one flesh suit for an entire lifetime. It's pretty amazing. And
my teacher calls it a meat bag.
Yeah, meat bag. There you go. And also to think about, if consciousness creates matter, then in a way, we are playing a part or a role in holding this meat bag together. That if we just chose one day, or had the insight to not play that role anymore, and just say, I'm going to let all these cells and these atoms just dissolve all of a sudden, then that could be possible. It's just amazing to think about all these things. And I love how you talked about the multiple perspectives with science, and then Buddhism, and then the hybrids between the two. It's all good stuff. And we could go on, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the details of this later with some of my other questions, but I'm really interested to know, well, because my own meditation practice has been for, I think, 15 plus years. And it started out as a way for me to work with the mind in a better way. So I first started approaching meditation for athletic performance enhancement. Like, how do I learn how to take better control over my mind, to become more aware of some of the things happening, so that I can control them better, so that I can perform better and reach flow states and things like that. So that's a whole different lineage of meditation practices, and largely here in the West, where we tend to think of like problem solution, and it fits that paradigm quite nicely. But I also, was exposed to, and still practice to this day, a lot of different types of meditation, a lot of which involve turning down the mind, or getting out of the mind, so that we can experience that pure awareness, that pure bliss. Do you practice multiple forms of meditation? Do you have different targets that you go after with different meditation sessions, or do you tend to just stick with one methodology?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I think that is another topic I'm super passionate about, because as I'm thinking about the next stage of my life, I think I will continue to be a lawyer. We'll probably talk about that at some point. I'll probably still do some legal work for as long as I can foreseeably see, but I don't want to be 60 or 65 fighting it out on law. And so I'm thinking about other ways to give back to society. And one of them is that I want to cultivate, mindfulness practices, awareness practices. And I also know that traditional meditation does not work for a lot of people. My wife, for example, will go to meditation classes or events with me occasionally, but it's not her jam. She doesn't like sitting in a formal posture and trying to clear her mind and all the formal practices. I mean, goodness, in my center, we sing mantra and prostrate and do all sorts of things that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. And so I'm very interested in alternative ways to reach that same sense of mindfulness and awareness. And so a lot of what I've been doing as alternatives to meditation, including this morning, is sound therapy, or sound meditations. And so this morning I have crystal bowls. Boy, I'm going to really show my hippie true heart here, but crystal bowls are a beautiful way to just ground yourself. And I have I have 8 bowls, but the 7 main chakra bowls, if you just spent 30 or 45 seconds or a minute or two on each bowl, these things they light the room up. I mean, they're so powerful. And so this morning I just sat and did each of the chakra bowls for a couple of minutes, took 15 or 20 minutes max, and just, allow myself to relax into the sound, which is a very soothing, harmonizing sound. And so, yeah, I definitely love sound healing. I actually have a whole bunch of sound healing tools, a gong, sound bowls, ocean drum, kashi bells. I'm working on becoming a handpan player, which is a very peaceful instrument. And so I guess what I'm saying here is that I'm very open to ideas about how to mash different things together, use alternative mechanisms to reach that same state, because so many people can't do it through traditional meditation. And I'm thinking, someday maybe I'll own a healing center where people can come and they can get sound healing. They can get, float tank therapy. They can get meditation with massage at the same time, blending these traditions together. And if anybody steals my idea, I might have to come after you. But, blending things like massage and meditation, or yoga and meditation. What if we had a breath practice through, some yoga places do this. They'll do a couple deep breaths. But what if you had the entire class while every movement was really focused on the breath? And these are the things that I think would help a lot of people get to that state of mindfulness, to, like you said, to stop trying to conceptualize, or, it is true when I'm meditating, I'm thinking, I want to benefit all beings. I want to take all the suffering of other beings. I want to give back this positive energy. Well, that still involves some thought, and yeah, it's a beautiful aspirational thought, but a lot of us need a break from that little motor in our mind that's talking to us. And I have almost never found something as powerful as sound healing to really wipe the slate clean. You can't think of anything else when those sound healing modalities are going off. And as I'm saying all this, I'm thinking, wait a minute, I forgot one of the most important modalities, which is plant medicine. Absolutely. I'm interested and an active participant in the plant medicine community, or plant sacrament community. I think we have to be careful talking about these substances as medicines. I believe fundamentally a lot of the sacred plants are really spiritual tools to heal our spirit and our consciousness and our soul. They have some ancillary physical benefits. This is important because I will talk about it more, but I'm working on, protecting religious communities using plant medicines. And, the more we talk about them as medicines, the government is starting to say, oh, well, that's a therapeutic thing. That's not spiritual. So for me, these plant medicines have been a deeply spiritual thing. And this is another example of, it's very hard to be, well, let me say it another way. It's plant medicines allows that consciousness work to happen at a deep level, so you can release some of your narrative. You can get out of your mind. It's another way, in my mind, when I drink ayahuasca or eat peyote or take rapé or any of the other plant medicines I've done, I'm doing that to heal this consciousness, to fortify my consciousness. And I agree with many of my teachers that for certain people, not everybody, occasional timed sacramental use of ceremonial use of plant sacraments is a super thing to get that consciousness, get that default mode network reset, to really get your mind cleared up of some of the clutter, reduce the anxiety. And that's what we're all struggling with, is this modern chronic disease of anxiety and depression, and just the PTSD of being alive in the 21st century. That's what I call it. I've got, I'm in recovery from lots of things. I'm in recovery from Western culture, from being male, from technology overload, from isolation, all the things that modern culture has, from poor diet. I mean, these are all things that we all need refuge from. And so all these things I mentioned, meditation, sound therapy, plant medicine, that's the reason I'm doing these things. I think I would probably be on mental health meds if I didn't have all these other tools, because I do suffer from occasional depression and, probably a lot of self-judgment that I'm working on. And so, I couldn't live without these healing modalities, without these mindfulness practices. And I absolutely agree. There should be lots of options for people, and I'm interested in all of them.
Yeah, I like that a lot. About the, so first of all, I think a lot of people have a similar idea that you had about like a healing center, retreat center. I think a lot of people in this realm have that idea already, but we're waiting for the legal piece to relax a little bit, so that we can actually bring that kind of vision into fruition. And once that legal framework does relax a little, I think there's going to be an upswell of people coming together to put these things together. So I hold that really close to my heart too. You bring up a really interesting thing I wanted to parse out a little bit, which is just the use of language in our culture around sacrament versus medicine. And I think that was brilliant the way you said it, because a lot of the psychedelic research for sure is tapping into psychedelic medicine qualities and therapy and things like that, which is good. But as soon as we start labeling it as medicine, then government wants to get involved, big pharma wants to get involved, big business wants to get involved, because there's profit to be made. Whereas if we choose to use a different word, sacrament, we can involve the spiritual aspects as well. And then the sacrament becomes a healing modality anyway. Like there's still a medicine quality to going to church and singing or praying, or that those are medicines for a lot of people, but we don't term them medicine, because if we said prayer was medicine, then I'm sure the government would try and charge us for a prescription for prayer, So I like that interplay between the two words, sacrament and medicine. And I think it's important that this psychedelic renaissance, this plant medicine renaissance is happening now. And we already saw it fail once in the past with the drug war and things like that. And there were some missteps that happened back then. And we're being presented an amazing opportunity to rewrite future history for ourselves and the future with these medicines and these sacraments. And I think it behooves us to take our time and to think it through, with great mindfulness, and to do this thing right this time, so that so those freedoms can't be stripped away from us. I think it's one of the biggest downfalls, downsides, I think, of modern American culture, modern world culture, is the restriction on people's ability to explore their own consciousness. We are sovereign individual and collective beings, and to have someone else tell us what we can and can't put in our body responsibly, and how we're allowed to explore our consciousness, I think I think that's a human rights issue. I think people should not say you can only stay in this lane and you can only engage with your own consciousness and your mind this way, and these other ways are going to land you in a prison cell.
It's great. It's crazy. Yeah, I'll say something about that, unless you weren't done.
No, go for it.
Yeah, no. In terms of the language, I guess I just wanted to mention that, Michael Pollan has been a great benefit to this movement. He wrote How to Change Your Mind, great book about the value of psychedelics to help with mental health and general consciousness practice in general. But when a lot of the decriminalization initiatives were coming out, Pollan came out and said, wait a second. Yeah, I wrote that great book about how great psychedelics are, but I don't think the American public is ready for decriminalization, for broad spread access to psychedelics. I'm bringing this up because the term medical is a very comfortable thing for Western cultures. And, Pollan's point was we need more FDA research before we decriminalize all these things. So what does the language speak to? It speaks to the societal biases, and Western bias is that medicine and science are the thing that are keystones of our culture. And those are the things that can give us permission to do certain things. What I did is, along with Bia Labache, I'm on the board of directors of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines, a great organization that is intercultural and dedicated to a dialogue that includes BIPOC and indigenous communities around the world, and is dedicated to reciprocity to these medicine keepers. So go check out Chacruna, chacruna.net, CHACRUNA. chacruna.net. But what Bia Labache and I said in response to Pollan is, that's funny that you think we need an FDA clinical trial to tell us whether or not psilocybin is safe to use. You really don't need, the Mazatec people in Mexico don't need an FDA study to tell them that their spiritual practice for thousands of years is safe, because they've been doing it as their culture for those thousands and thousands of years. The Shipibo Canibo people of Peru don't need an FDA study to tell them whether or not ayahuasca is safe to consume, because they've been practicing with it since time immemorial. And I'm connecting these two things, and that was our main point to Pollan. But the terminology is so important because, in South America, if you have a spiritual trauma that you want healed, the shaman is the cultural context to go get that healed. So it's very natural for indigenous and mestizo people in South America to seek out the shaman, because that's the cultural figure that handles that problem. In the West, it's the doctor. Like I say, the shamans of America are the doctors and nurses and therapists. And so this is where our cultural biases and language become important. And it actually ends up being reflected in the polling around this issue. We'll probably talk about some of my policy initiatives that I'm working on. But when we poll people and say, well, do you support the legalization or decrim of psychedelics? The word psychedelics alone is less favorable than plant medicines. Plant medicines, even though earlier I said we got to maybe get away from that term, again, the bias in the language, people like the term medicine. Medicine sounds good for you. Medicine sounds like a doctor would give it to you, or an FDA has approved it. And so the term plant medicine is much more favorable to the public than psychedelics. And honestly, I'm not a huge fan of any of the terms we have right now. I do like sacrament. I think that's nice. I think that's a hard term in a culture that is becoming less and less spiritual. Less and less religious.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the problem with America becoming less and less religious is that then when you tell the masses that this is a spiritual or religious thing, I think there's going to be some hurdle to that too. So anyways, it's just fascinating how the language, like you said, it really does matter. It matters in our polling. It matters in the systems we're creating to decriminalize these substances. You know, a lot of the energy is going towards a medicalization model right now on psychedelics. But yeah, I mean, why does it need to be medicalization? Why shouldn't it be just individual liberty, cognitive liberty, personal freedom? Or why shouldn't it be spiritual freedom? You know, this is supposed to be one of the greatest countries in the world in terms of protecting religious liberty, founded on the idea that pilgrims and other refugees from Europe should be entitled to believe whatever they want and to do whatever they want spiritually. And yet, like you said, now we have these laws that in some ways could be interpreted that, I mean, we could talk about this more, but yeah, I mean, basically right now the government's position is there's only 2 churches in the US that can use ayahuasca, and they're very limited. Anybody else using it is doing it illegally. And there's no such thing as there's no such thing as a psilocybin church, never been recognized in the United States. And there's only a peyote church in the Native American community. Nobody outside of Native Americans can use peyote. If you ask the DEA, that's what they would say right now. There's no such thing as an MDMA church. There's no such thing as spiritual use of iboga. I mean, we can go down on and on the list that the US right now, the federal government's position is these things are not spiritual practices. It's all drug use. And so, you know, this is the work we have to do. And I guess connecting these dots to what I said earlier about indigenous people, the point is in the US, psychedelics are counterculture. That's what it's termed. This is counterculture psychedelics. In indigenous communities and traditional communities and medicine keeper communities, this is culture. You know, when you're sick spiritually, you go to the shaman. When you transcend from one phase of life to another, you go take a entheogen or psychedelic plant to become a man, to decide what to do in a traumatic situation, to get rid of negative spirits. That's a culture underlying their entire existence. And that's the process America, the US is in, is actually taking this from this term counterculture and making it culture. That's why the terminology is so important, because someday this country will accept the idea that for some people, when there's trauma in their lives, it's culturally not only appropriate, but needed to go have a sit with grandmother Aya. It's culturally appropriate and needed to go take peyote or psilocybin. And right now, we remain a super minority in this country, and we have a lot of work to do as a movement to educate the masses, to get the mass culture to accept that this is true culture, that there is something more than recreational frivolity involved in what we're doing, that actually there is a positive thing to many people's lives about psychedelics that should never be punished, that should be protected, and should be culturally institutionalized. So that's why these words are so important. And someday we'll even get to say that psychedelics are part of our mainstream culture.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want, or I don't need the FDA to tell me that that my practice of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is good for me, or is a spiritual thing for me, because I already know that, and
that's so true.
I do believe that, there is, and, I might be, I don't even know what percentage of people in this field think this way. I think there's kind of tribes being formed with different ways of thinking, but I sort of align myself with thinking that there is a place for all ways to use these medicines, right? So that there is a pathway for medicine and for therapy and for even prescription use of these medicines. But then
Sure.
there's also room and should be a lane for spiritual use of these things, and there should also be a lane for recreational use of some of these things, and that all of them can coexist simultaneously, and that we don't need to just choose one and go with that way, because that's going to cast out so many people. We're trying to be more inclusive. We need to recognize that everybody has their own way of using these things, and no one way is more right than another. So I just wanted to put that out there too, and ask you. You were saying, the DEA would say this, and the ATF, and they would all say these things about it, and they're entrenched in Western government. And I'm wondering if they're labeling it as counterculture and seeing it as non, MDMA church doesn't exist and things like that, if that's just a
Right.
byproduct of our government sort of being founded around Western religion. I mean, church and state are supposed to be separate, but the country was formed out of like I don't know, like a Christian based, Protestant based, people who were coming over here and forming the government had their own religious beliefs, and whether they tried to separate them or not, they poured that into what they wrote innately. So I'm wondering if a lot of these current laws and restrictions are being tainted or colored sort of by this blinder type view of, this is the way to do it. I'd have to say I would think so. We're not being inclusive of these other traditions.
Yeah, one of as you can tell, I give long answers. So let me take a sidebar here and then come around the circle back to your point. But, one of the things I like to think about is that I'm Irish and Scottish. My ancestry is Irish and Scottish. And, there's a couple other things in there, but that's the primary ancestry. And, I am trying to reconnect with my ancestral roots. We're here in the U.S., America, for the last, 400 years. Westerners have been here 450 years or whatever it is. And, think back to that time. Everybody's ancestors were indigenous people somewhere. So my ancestors were Celtic people. They were indigenous to Central Europe and moved around Europe. I think yours too, right? We're both Irish.
Yeah, Irish, and then I have some Scandinavian too. But and all these cultures in their history have used plant sacraments also. Even Christianity and stuff. Right?
That's exactly where I was going. So my point about this is that definitely there was psilocybin cubensis in Ireland. Definitely there's a shamanic figure, Curanono or Curanunu. There's a shamanic figure in Celtic mythology. He's got elk antlers holding a snake in one hand. If you look up Celtic shamanic figures, you'll find this figure. And so there's a lot of evidence that there likely were shamanic practices in the Celtic culture. And my people were just Christianized 1,000 years ago. So with respect to Native American people, I like to say, hey, both of us come from cultures that were just conquered at different times. Mine was 1,000 years ago, yours 500 years ago, and or more recently in some cases, not universal. But the bottom line is that what you said about Christianity. See, that's what I think about, is that Christianity has been a problem for psychedelic reform, because I do believe that basic Protestantism, the idea is that it's not okay to reach God through an altered state of consciousness, that only through devout practice can you reach God. That mentality, that puritanical mentality, has been a roadblock, and we're living with this legacy of 1950s, 60s thinking that was much stronger in the Protestant tradition than it is now. And that's why, I feel compassionate for these government officials. They're enforcing laws that were drafted in 1960. The Controlled Substances Act goes back to the early 60s. And those were people who came of age during the 30s and 40s. Imagine the mentality then. I mean, it was literally 18th century mentality. People had been raised by somebody born in 1850 or 1860 or whatever. So I try to be compassionate to all of that. But I think the point is that even in Christianity, like you said, I love the Immortality Key, this new book that traces the presence of ergot, which is the fungus that you can produce LSD from. Psychedelic fungus was present in the grain of ancient European peoples, and the mysteries of Eleusis and the other pre-Christian traditions that included this ergot wine, and that there's even this thinking that probably Jesus was serving ergot-laced wine that was psychedelic wine. And what was Christ's one of his fundamental insights was that, the kingdom of God is within you. Mm-hmm. And this is a very psychedelic idea. I mean, so anyways, look, this is the part where mainstream culture starts rolling its eyes. But I think really what's important about that is that we are letting go of some of this Protestant mentality about it. That actually now, from whatever perspective you look at, modern Americans, they like to think that they're rational and making scientifically based decisions. This is great for us because if you look at the economics of prohibition, or you look at the morality of it, or you look at the science of it, or you look at the social justice aspects of it, or you look at the environmental impacts of it, we have so many ways in which the criminalization of psychedelics is contrary to all those things I just said. It's bad for people of color, bad for the environment, bad for social justice, bad for LGBTQ rights, bad for, all these aspects of our culture, bad economically. We're wasting money putting people behind bars who have no business being there. We have the winning argument. This is the exciting thing, is that we have the right answer on all these topics. The defense is this weird, 1950s, non-informed, non-scientific mentality. And that's why it's so exciting to be part of this movement, because we have all the right answers on those questions. It's not going to be perfect. A post-criminalization model is going to have problems. But really, on all the major issues, we have the right morals. We have the right economics. We have the right mental health. We have the right social justice perspective. And that's why it's so exciting to be a part of this and advocating for changes. And I think that's why the public is moving. That's why Denver decrimmed psilocybin. That's why Oregon did it. And that's why Oakland did it, and DC, because the public knows the drug war is a total failure. They're just looking for a coherent model. And I don't think these old Christian puritanical things are going to stand in the way too much longer. But, the leaders of this movement need to really take advantage of this moment, because if we waste this chance, we may not get another one for a long time. So right now is the time to get involved and try to change the rules.
Yeah, those puritanical veins run really deep, though, in the halls
they
of
do.
government. And I really think it's going to be, and as we're seeing right now, it's going to take the people. It's going to take the people coming together around these issues, and that's what's going to, overcome the strength of those politicians. And I love seeing that, in Oregon, and seeing the shift in the collective consciousness of the constituents voting. And then, even though their politician might be saying like, no, I don't really support this, but I have to go along with what my people are voting for. It's the people that are going to really make
right.
the change here. And so before we get into, I definitely want to ask you about the specific projects and avenues that you're exploring with your legal career and through Chacruna. But before that, I want to ask a couple questions sort of in the same vein of what we were just talking about, which is this movement that's happening. And being an insider on the legal side, and I'm really curious to hear what your perception is as far as what do you think are some of the biggest obstacles to legalization or decriminalization, as well as what do you think are some of the biggest inroads to legalization and decriminalization? Because if the people want it, they want it, but they have to know, which is the best pathway, which is going to be the most effective pathway for us to take to get this done, and what are some of the roadblocks that we have to avoid to get it done?
Yeah, another amazing question. I the first thing that came to my mind, or one of the first things, was to say, it's interesting. I'm 48 now, so I lived through this first wave of cannabis legalization and contributed significantly, I think, to that, and was proud to be part of that. And now I'm at this point where I have been kind of jaded by the cannabis experience, not just jaded by the way it played out. I think there's a lot of great things about it, but I have some insights into that question that might just be a reflection of this experience I had starting in 2004 when I tried to start advocating for the legalization of marijuana. If you think about where the society and culture is between now and 2004, I mean, 30 states have legalized cannabis in one form of another. I think 40 something states have at least CBD legal. Well, it's legal nationwide, but some sort of program for access. I mean, basically, now it's the exception in America if you're not in a medical or recreational marijuana state. So what I'm saying is, like, part of me thinks my perspective might be skewed by this 2004 early cannabis advocate thing. And I'm calling on the young people to be the visionaries. I'm not sure I'm the visionary anymore. I want the visionaries to step forward and tell us the right messaging and the right things that connect with people deeply. But some of the insights from that era that apply, I think, to psychedelics is that, we have to remember that even marijuana users were the minority of the culture. 20% of Americans smoke cannabis on a regular basis. 50% have tried it. Maybe that number's higher now, but that still means that the regular users were a minority. They needed the consent of the majority to have tolerance for their activities. When you think about the challenges with psychedelics, where even the recent surveys I've seen, it's only like 5 or 6 or maybe 7 or 8 or 10% max of Americans admit to a lifetime use of a psychedelic. And only like 1% say they've used it recently. Think about that compared to cannabis numbers. Think about how much more work we have to do to familiarize people with these psychedelics. They really are a much smaller niche than cannabis. And that means that we have a lot more work to do to demystify the stereotypes around them. And so that gets to, the point about, well, what is the best messaging? I in the California decriminalization initiative I worked on, the founder of that, Ryan Munavar, told me that they had some kind of poll or survey they did, and that 17 out of 20 people, when asked why they should legalize psychedelics, that their first answer was personal freedom. And so cognitive liberty, personal freedom. And then the next one was either spiritual or medical. But these are like a fraction. 1 or 2 people said medical, 1 person said spiritual. And so, if you listen to the political consultant class right now and you tell them, well, look, we did this survey in California, the number 1 message should be personal freedom. They say, no, because the public doesn't want to think this is going to be recreational use, that this is going to be unregulated use. And what I'm saying about the visionaries need to step up is, so right now this political class has a lot of input because they raise money to do some of these ballot initiatives. They're probably not going to go with a campaign that says personal liberty. But part of me thinks that's probably the best argument. What if we could really make that in a state like Colorado where 30% are unaffiliated and there's a strong libertarian streak in the state of Colorado? It might be a hell of an argument. But, overall, what it looks like, people are more focused on the medicalization or therapeutic argument as probably the primary argument, because, again, what we were talking about earlier, this medical term, and it invokes the idea of supervised and doctors and FDA approved. And so that's why the first ever psychedelic statewide initiative was a therapeutic model in Oregon, where you can go to a center and take psilocybin on site and not leave until they let you leave. And that said to people, hey, they're not going to go drive. They're not going to be parenting high. They're not going to be legally allowed to go to a concert on mushrooms. Actually, under Measure 109, it just legalized those therapeutic centers. It didn't even legalize cultivation at home or possession at home. Luckily, another initiative did that for small amounts. But so my point is that, that's where the political class is right now. They think it's a therapeutic medical argument is the best. It's a very powerful argument. It's the one that, in Denver, we've seen the Denver Denver district attorney say that she's interested in the medical benefits of psychedelics and psilocybin. It does resonate very deeply with people. And at a time when we have this mental health crisis, I think that also resonates, so that it's a super powerful argument. The spiritual argument is not actually, I think, a very powerful one, because I think it is, it's, for me, it's the most powerful. But for the public, they think, oh, I don't know, I'm not very spiritual anymore. Isn't that just drug use? So, I mean, of the options we have, I think, from what I see, probably a therapeutic model is the leading candidate for the winning argument. But I wish, kind of like you said earlier, that we could get into a dialogue about multiple lanes, and maybe there's different restrictions at each level. Doctor, FDA approved stuff, you have to have a doctor's prescription. Therapeutic model, you can go to a therapy clinic. Recreational use, I love Rick Doblin's idea. Maybe everybody gets a license to use any drug they want to use, just like we get a driver's license to drive a car. That means you have to have some education, and you have to be told what the risks are and show that you know the risks, and take a test of some kind and tell somebody you can handle these things responsibly. Maybe even have to have a mental health eval. I don't want to go that far, but my point is, you get a license, and then if you use those drugs in an irresponsible way, we could take your license away. But as long as you're using them responsibly, not hurting others, then you can use whatever drug you want. So I mean, I'm saying each concept probably has a different format, and actually each drug probably should be treated a little differently. But I also heard a great quote a couple of weeks ago. A lot of people say, talking about drug exceptionalism, that psychedelics are better than other drugs. That's kind of an elitist, white privilege comment, because it means, hey, yeah, those bad drugs like heroin and meth that other people do, especially people of color, those are bad, but my elitist drug is okay. Anyways, my point is, I don't believe in that. I think all drugs should be decriminalized or regulated in some way. But I don't believe in drug exceptionalism, but I believe that psychedelics are exceptional. And I believe they have profound ability to, heal us in this time. And so I'm dedicated to this movement because that's what I want, is healing for people. And so, I think it's so many facets of an issue here, but I like what my friend Duffy from SPORE, the Society for Psychedelic Outreach, Reform, and Education, says, is that, we really, those advocates that want to do this the right way, we don't just want to cram the easiest thing down people's throats. We want to engage in a community dialogue. We want to get input. We want to think about health equity issues when we make decisions about what a model should look like. So any old model isn't going to do. But I think if we do the work, that an equitable model that has different lanes for different substances and maybe different standards for different things within each psychedelic drug, I think we can come up with some answers here. And we're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong initially and fix it over time. But, eventually we're going to have it right, because, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep imprisoning people. We can't keep, letting people languish with no mental health treatment. We can't keep people untreated for their mental health conditions. And I think that's ultimately going to win the argument, those variety of things. And we'll get there 20, 30 years, hopefully. In my lifetime, we'll see a rational drug policy around psychedelics with a lot of fits and starts.
Yeah, so maybe just a general angle of alleviating suffering for people with these things, whether it be decarceration,
yeah, that's a good point.
Decarceration or mental health or anything like that.
Yeah.
So many good points. I don't even know where to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did the talk in circles.
No, it's good. I love that quote too. And I'm starting to believe too that, that term psychedelic exceptionalism is thrown around quite a bit. And it's like a hot topic these days in this field where we're really trying to avoid doing that.
Right.
However, I just read Dr. Carl Hart's book,
Drug Use for Adults.
Drug Use for Adults. And in there, he talks about these exceptionalism, stances and where, where people who might use psychedelics might say like, well, it's better than heroin or better than meth. And, white people don't use it, but the research and the statistics show that white people are the ones that use
They are the main
methamphetamine.
users.
Yeah, the main users of all these other drugs as well. And so I think that argument is total bullshit. And one of my dear friends, I'm not gonna say her name on the podcast, but she gave me a quote the other day because I had a past visionary altered state experience where I went really deep, and I was with a group of people and had a full-blown mystical state experience. It was one of the most profound experiences I'd ever had, but it was in the context of a group, and the group did not accept me, or was not accepting of me having that depth of an experience with them. Like it was supposed to be just a social setting. And I spontaneously went deep, and I was shamed for it, and it was held against me. And so she said, you know what, sometimes even within the psychedelic field, we disagree on how and what substances should be used. And she said her go-to mantra is "fuck your psychedelics." like I'm gonna do my own, and my own pathway is the right way for me. And screw you for trying to judge the way that I go about doing this. So I really like that. I want to shift a little bit, and if you could share with me, because I don't know all the aspects of what you do. I know you do so much for the community, but share with the audience too. What are some of the projects you're working on? What are you doing with Chacruna? What are you doing in the legal realms? And with just lay it all out for me. What are you doing?
Cool. Yeah, no, hopefully I don't stop me if I go too long. This feels like an interview for my next job. So hopefully somebody out there will hire me. But no, I will tell this backstory. I like to tangent and then get to the point, but I'm here out of a sense of service and out of a sense of, dedication to these sacraments and medicines, because I personally have received so much healing and spiritual insight and enlightenment from primarily ayahuasca, rapé, but other plant medicines as well, psilocybin, definitely. And what that does to you, psychedelics are catalysts. And so I basically came back from my first ayahuasca trip and called Rick Doblin and was like, okay, how do I help? Because, this is a very typical story now. White guy goes to Costa Rica, drinks ayahuasca, wants to save the world. But, Rick put me in touch with Bia Labache, who really was the leading kind of ayahuasca advocate. There's more and more groups stepping up in the U.S., but my work with her has been the foundation of everything that I've done in this movement. And, like I said about service, my motto in my career has been give, and then you shall receive. And so out of the box, I just said, how can I help? And I've given hundreds of hours to Chacruna as their general counsel. I got their 501c3 approved. I've helped them put on multiple conferences now over the last couple of years. I named the Psychedelic Liberty Summit and helped co-create the event. And then this year we had the Sacred Plants of the Americas conference. That was a huge hit. We had 1,300 people at the one last year and about 1,000 people this year. Record attendance for these events. But, coming out of that, what I've been doing is educating myself and then starting to work with the community. And I have my own community here in Colorado. And so I represent 4 or 5 ayahuasca churches right now, where I'm helping them understand what the law says, kind of reviewing their doctrine to see if somebody just came out of the box and said, hey, ayahuasca is good for everybody, is that enough? What do you need to say? What does the law require you to do and say to recognize you so that you don't get arrested? All these ayahuasqueros and their participants want is to know they're not going to jail. Mm-hmm. And so how do you do that? And we're working through that with a bunch of churches. And also on the church side, I'm working with psilocybin churches. Again, this would be a first in America to have a church recognized based on psilocybin. But the law in the U.S. is called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It just says if you're engaged in a sincere religious practice, that the government can't burden you without a compelling state interest. So that should mean that any religious practice, if I'm Christian, Hindu, Sufi, pagan, Satanist, you know, any religious practice should be able to be recognized. That means that, you know, a lot of people view plant sacrament work as a religious work. And so I'm working through that with a lot of communities, and also participating. I have been trained to serve rapé, and I feel very connected to rapé. It's a legal substance in the United States, by the way. It's tobacco ash and other herbs, and it's a very powerful medicine. It's a third eye cleanser. It's an opening of your pineal gland. It's a tobacco medicine, so it's both grounding and elevating. So I guess what I'm saying is, you know, I've been in ceremony where I've served rapé, I've sang mantra to people and helped their state. So I'm also a practitioner. I'm not just the president of the Hair Club for Men. I'm also a client. But I love that part of the movement. It's my actual spiritual community. I feel so at home in those spiritual communities. And I'm just, you know, I'm a normal, regular member of the community in that way. So that's the spiritual side. And then, you know, I have a background of representing professionals in front of licensing boards, done that with massage therapists and lawyers. And so I've started to work with therapists who want to give psychedelic assisted therapy. Right now, there's not a lot to do with therapists unless you're doing ketamine or a clinical trial. You know, the consultation is probably an hour long, but, you know, it's worth it if you're an underground therapist who's not sure how far you should or can go, and you want to understand the risks, you know, because there's therapists out there right now that are giving their clients psilocybin, that are conducting ayahuasca ceremonies. What are the risks to them? Or can they get their license taken away? What if you take somebody to Jamaica to do psilocybin? Is that a problem? Because it's legal in Jamaica, but you have a license in the US. So I'm thinking through some issues like that for therapists. I have this regulatory administrative background in my practice. So a couple companies have come to me and said, hey, we want to manufacture psilocybin for clinical trials. We need a DEA license. Can you help us do that? And yeah, even for cannabis, I applied for a DEA license. If you want to legally manufacture cannabis, psilocybin, ayahuasca, iboga, any of those medicines, you need a Schedule I license from the DEA. Unless you have a religious argument, that's a separate issue. But the point is, so I'm working through 3 DEA applications right now for Schedule I substances. And then, you know, a lot of what I'm doing is the policy side, and my passion is in changing the laws. You know, I like to say I'm a pioneer, not a settler. And so cannabis has kind of got me bored now that it's all big business and M&A and transactions. I helped legalize cannabis and started the industry up, and now it's not really my passion. So with psilocybin, the policy change, or psychedelics, the policy change is foundational. And so I'm on the Denver Psilocybin Policy Review Panel, which is implementing I-301, the Denver Decrim of Psilocybin Initiative, along with you, my co-panelists, and our other friends and colleagues on that panel. And I'm so excited about that. I'll talk about each of these very quickly, but yeah, we're at the final stages in Denver of issuing a report about the impact of psilocybin decriminalization on the city. And the big picture takeaway is basically nothing has changed in the city. The sky didn't fall. There hasn't been major public health problems. And, you know, the upside is we've started this project of training first responders to deal with anybody using psychedelics, because that's obviously a niche community and people need to be handled appropriately in that context. So that's a groundbreaking advancement, this training that you've been so integral in helping to set up. And so we're so excited about what's happened in Denver, and likely going to be recommending, or we are recommending, additional changes in Denver. Right now, only possession, cultivation, and storage were decriminalized. The panel agreed that social sharing should also be decriminalized, as long as you're not charging money. If you give your friend some psilocybin, that seems like it shouldn't be a priority of the police. And technically right now you could be arrested for that. So be careful out there. Same thing with therapeutic use. The panel said, you know, there should be some ability for community healing ceremonies or therapeutic use. And so we're very hopeful that the Denver City Council will take these recommendations and expand the law. And so that's hugely important. And I'm getting ready this week to finish reviewing the report. I think you're doing the same thing. And we're looking forward to having that released this summer and maybe be in front of the city council by late summer or early fall for more exciting developments. Yeah, beyond that, it's, I helped draft the 2020 California Decrim Initiative because I'd helped draft Amendment 64. So I've drafted a lot of ballot initiatives in the past. And so people have called on me to do a little more of that. California didn't get to the ballot in 2020 because COVID killed signature gathering. But now there's this bill in the California legislature that would decriminalize all psychedelics and create a panel or a government roundtable to look into possible regulation. And so I contributed to the drafting of that bill on behalf of Dr. Bronner's. Dr. Bronner's, people know from the soap, but he and his company are also great advocates of drug policy reform and particular advocates of psychedelics. And so he's very active in the funding of a lot of the reform, him and a couple other groups. And so I worked for him out there in California, also worked for him in Seattle, where they are introducing a decrim entheogens initiative at the city level. And yeah, I'm working with Kevin Matthews in Denver on his political advocacy organization, Vote Nature, that is hoping to empower people to contact legislators to advocate for reform. And if that wasn't enough, I'm a legal advisor to SPORE. It used to be their general counsel, but again, as I like to say, the movement needs another lawyer because I'm tired and there's only so much I can do. So Courtney Barnes is now the general counsel of SPORE. And I also want to platform other people and give other people opportunities. We helped start the Psychedelic Bar Association, which is coming together. And as part of Chacruna, I'm on the Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants, which is a group of lawyers that advocate. So call me, contact me, any questions about psychedelics. If I can't help you, there's a lot of other people out there that can. And so those are the buckets I'm in, spiritual work, therapeutic work, company work to get DEA licenses, policy work. And that's probably one or too many categories too many. So, but I'm pretty busy and I'm making this big change in my career. I've slowly been announcing that I'm shutting down this cannabis-based practice this fall and going to be focusing almost exclusively on psychedelics. I'll probably still do a few other things, but that's the commitment I have, is that, one of the things psychedelics tells us and the insight we have is be true to yourself, live your truth, be your truth. And I'm just not going to spend another day of this precious life doing things I don't want to do. I realize I'm very privileged to be able to say this, but that having this opportunity, I'm going to work on the things I care about, work for the clients I believe in. And so that means it's got to be, dedicated to reciprocity and giving back, dedicated to social justice, dedicated to healing, dedicated to broad spread decriminalization that doesn't result in more injustice to people of color and empowers people in their personal liberty. So anybody that's into those things, I want to hang out with. And that's the fun thing about my career, is I get to hang out with the most amazing people and do the most amazing work and, be passionate about it and know that this is part of my spiritual practice, that I'm trying to cure my own karma and heal others. And if I do something that is just about making money or something that I'm not passionate about, I'm not really advancing that ball. So that's what my career has been about. And I'm just honored to be the trusted advisor of many people in the movement and excited about what's coming.
So amazing. And I just want to be respectful of your time too. Do I have you for an additional 30 minutes?
I thought we said an hour and a half, but I go maybe 15 or 20 more minutes.
Okay. So then I don't want to get too deep into this, but it sounds like overall you've already found a good way to balance between your spiritual or cosmic work as well as your more grounded human work. And I think that's really important, especially for for those of us, for all of us, not to find ourselves too locked in or entrenched into one or the other, but to find a balance between the two so that we can merge
Yeah,
those two in this plane.
that's true.
So in the time that I have left with you, I definitely want to jump into your personal experiences around
Mm,
visionary experiences. And
cool.
we've talked, I've talked to great extent on this podcast about some of mine, so the audience is well aware of those. But you did mention that your own practice has helped you through trauma. It has been a path of healing for you.
Hmm.
Can you share with us, maybe some some experiences that have been fundamental in shifting who you are and how you show up to the world, or helping you get through trauma, and maybe share that story with us if you would honor us?
Yeah, of course. I think it is important to, be vulnerable and be open, to the extent you're comfortable. But I think I was recently at a ceremony where someone admitted a very difficult. Well, I've seen people talk about sexual abuse. I've seen them talk about incest in their life, including perpetrating it as a child. Luckily, it wasn't someone who was an adult, but some inappropriate child-to-child contact. And I just think that, it is, to the extent people can share, it is powerful. But my life has been a very privileged life. I know that, born, even though I'm Irish by now, it's not bad being Irish in America. You're white and you have all the privilege you need. And I grew up with, with an upper middle class lifestyle in suburban Atlanta, to a successful group of parents without any significant mental health in my family's history that I know about. Definitely some alcoholism and some other trauma related to alcohol abuse. My grandfather was an alcoholic that deeply affected my father. Um, and I think, to the small t trauma that I can claim in my childhood, my parents divorced when I was 12. I witnessed domestic violence. I had the, rides in the car where mother is fleeing the angry father, and you don't know where you're going as a child, and mom's taking you to a hotel and you're scared. So I had some, decently traumatic experiences as a child. And one thing that I felt about my childhood was when my parents divorced at 12, my mom had kind of used me as her primary therapist through the whole thing. Because at that point, my brothers were already out of the house. It was just me and my mom, and she was terribly emotional. There was a terrible divide in our family. My oldest brother sided with my mother, my middle brother sided with my dad. The family was divided. I was kind of the middle one trying to make peace. I wanted to be everybody's friend. But my point about this is, in your spiritual practice, you come hopefully to see that while, trauma is terrible and it's not a good thing, that there can be very important lessons and positive things that come from trauma. And I always felt that traumatic divide in my family helped me mature in an early age and seek out a spiritual path. So I was on a spiritual path, even as early as high school. I was Christian at the time, and doing things like writing poetry, looking for insight into life, looking for understanding and meaning. But overall, I had this privileged life, and I came from this successful father. And I think, the divide in the family made me want to kind of prove myself to my father. And so I went out and I did these accomplishing things. I graduated with honors from undergrad. I went to law school and graduated in the top 15%, top tier of the class. But the one thing about all that is I made the decision to law school. I grew my hair long and I said, you know what? I'm only doing public interest things. Even though I had great grades, I got out of law school and didn't have a job. I just worked for people until I found an environmental job. So anyways, the point I'm making is that I had a pretty privileged upbringing, but I was on a good path. And then I got into a relationship that has changed my life fundamentally. In my early 30s, met a woman that I knew for only a few weeks before she got pregnant. And that pregnancy ended in an abortion. And I tried to end the relationship. And then, in a moment of insecurity and self doubt, decided, well, this person loves me. even though I know she has mental health issues, can't you make anything work if you just try? And it turned out to be the worst decision of my life. So my story is actually a very common one that I'll let you actually talk about karma. Just like my dad, I got somebody pregnant I wasn't married to because she got pregnant again. After the first pregnancy that ended in abortion, she got pregnant again, unplanned. And at that point, it was like, well, we have to have this baby. You can't just keep having abortions. And then I doubled down and said, well, I'll just marry this person who is having my baby. And then 2 years into the first baby's life, or 3 years in, it's like, wow, I love my daughter. She's so great. Let's have another kid so she can have a sibling. And then I had another baby with this person. And, you know, what this experience showed me is that, you know, getting someone involved in your life with deep mental illness, and I'm sure I've got problems too, but she had been raped as a child. My ex-wife had been raped as a child by her father. Yeah, be careful about how many personal details I share, but she had deep, you know, trauma in her life, and she had diagnosed PTSD, ADHD, and this deep intergenerational trauma. Her father committed suicide when she was 13. And I thought I could just handle all this, you know, and if I could just make enough money, do all these things and keep a nice life for her, that we could keep it under control. And I learned some very deep lessons, and I developed my own mental illness and struggle out of that relationship. That the relationship deteriorated. And, you know, there was some severe dysfunction, especially in the intimacy realm, probably some overuse of pornography. You know, by the end of the relationship, the intimacy was really unhealthy, is what I would say. And I let myself devolve as the whole thing devolved into an unhealthy place. And at the end of the relationship, I had a false allegation of domestic violence. I was charged with a crime. I was put in jail. And ultimately, the case was dismissed because it was a total lie. I didn't hit my ex-wife. The night I told her our marriage was actually over, she headbutted the car. And so, I mean, I had that trauma where that happened to me, and go through the criminal justice system. And then, you know, the worst thing was, after the divorce for a few years, we had a normal co-parenting thing. But then I met a new woman and started getting engaged and was going to get married to somebody, my wife now. And from my perspective, my ex-wife just took the opportunity to start telling my children that my new wife was evil and she was an alcoholic and my house wasn't safe. And in fact, your dad's not safe because he's a sexual pervert. And before I know it, my children are saying to me that I'm going to hell. I'm not a Christian. I'm a bad person. My wife's an alcoholic. And ultimately, there was allegations of child abuse against me. And I will admit, I spanked my son 4 years ago, and it was out of line, and I shouldn't have done it. But that was a triggering factor to where my ex-wife and children went to the authorities, said I'm a child abuser. There was a full investigation by social services. There was no social services case brought against me. There was a full investigation by Denver police, which I cooperated with, and no charges were ever brought against me. But what happened was a process of parental alienation or psychological alignment. As I said, I know I played a part in some of this downfall of my family, but I haven't seen my kids on a really consistent basis for 4 years. So when we talk about trauma, you know, I'm going to get through this without crying, but, you know, I love my children more than life itself. And, you know, that's the level of trauma that I've experienced, that I have been totally separated from my children. I've spent $250,000 on psychologists and lawyers, and the system has really failed me. And what I determined at the end of the day was the system, we've had reunification therapy, therapists, GALs, all these therapists in my children's lives. And they just say to everybody, we don't want any part of any of this. Get away from us. We don't want to deal with therapists and reunification. And it's become this big stressful thing. So I just decided that it was better for my children to step back and say, okay, my daughter's 15. In 3 years, she'll be 18. I could play you the video. I got to see her a couple of weeks ago, and she made a video for me because she asked me to come get her in a tough spot. And she wanted to protect me from any allegations I was doing something wrong. So she made a video. these kids love me. I will have a relationship with them. But as the main therapist said, until they're out of their mother's domain, they're never going to feel safe having a relationship with me. And so I have to just step back right now, and I have to wait for my children to get older, and I have to miss some of the best years of their life. So if you want to talk about deep trauma, and brothers and sisters, I know I'm not perfect and I made some mistakes, but every evaluation of this situation is that it's in my children's best interest to have a relationship with me. And I just am not able to have that right now. And so dealing with that deep mental wound, it's a spiritual wound. It's actually a spiritual wound to be alienated from my children, has been the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with. But back to my point earlier about making these challenges into a positive thing, I would not be an advocate of plant medicine without that terrible trauma in my life. I would not have deepened my spiritual practice in the way I have without this trauma related to my children. And I hate that they have become a little bit of sacrificial lambs on the altar of my elevation of my spiritual consciousness. But I also believe that my children they have their own karma separate from me, and that they also have intergenerational trauma through their mother's line in some ways, and through my line, the alcoholism and other. I know all of us have violence and sexual violence and other trauma in our family's history. So I know that there's karma and trauma on everybody's side, but I'm just saying, I know my children are here in part to live through some of that trauma. And actually my hope in life related to plant sacraments is that in not too distant future, I'm going to sit and drink ayahuasca with my daughter and my son. Maybe he's only 12, so he's got a ways to go, but it could be 3 or 4 years before my daughter's old enough to sit in an ayahuasca ceremony. And I'm thinking that that's the other reason I've been brought to these medicines, because I can help heal these children that have such deep trauma. And that's the kind of motivation I have to help the world, because it's for my children, it's for my ancestors, it's for 7 generations forward. And when you have that kind of deep trauma behind you, you're not going to stop. You're not going to you're not going to compromise. You're going to keep doing it because you've felt it so deeply. And what I said about my privileged life, to have this experience has humbled me beyond words. And, I think my main failing in the past was a certain entitlement and arrogance and lack of compassion for others, and thinking I'm conquering the world. I'm doing what I want. I'm a lawyer. I'm a progressive. I'm doing drug policy. But to have this thing happen, has really broken me open to the suffering of others and dedicated me to, practices that benefit others as well. And so in that way, it's been the greatest gift I could have ever received. At the same time, it's been the worst pain that I've ever felt. But as you can tell, I'm still working through the trauma, because it literally was only this March of 2021 when I gave up on the court fight after 3.5 years and almost $300,000 of time and money. I just decided, one of the themes of my life is, every time, a lot of people are like this, every time things get tough, what have you done in your life? You just work harder. Sometimes in life, when things aren't going right or it's not working, you have to stop. You just have to stop trying. And so that's kind of the spiritual insight I got to. And I was just like, I can't, you can't force love. I lost the battle of these kids' hearts and minds a couple of years ago, or their whole lifetime. I guess it wasn't a battle. That's the whole thing. But the point is to keep fighting, to keep pushing, to keep trying to get my way right now. It's like, spiritually, what I need to do is sit back, and they're going to see, and they already have, the mental illness of their mother. And they're going to remember those beautiful childhood memories they had with me, and they'll be back. And I just need to be patient and be the best person I can be when they come back, to be worthy of picking up where I left off and spending the rest of my life as their dad and as a person that they're proud to call their dad. So that's the story, and it's terrible. And it's difficult, but I'm grateful and humbled and motivated by that trauma to move forward for the benefit of a lot of people.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. takes a lot of courage to share that with one individual, let alone publicly on a podcast. So I appreciate that. I'm sure a lot of people can connect with a lot of different parts of your story. And, it's something I remind myself all the time, but that I think applies to everybody, especially when we think about our trauma, is that, it couldn't have happened any other way in order for you to become the person that you are today, with the drives and the motivations that you have and the things that you're pursuing. Like you said, without that trauma, you wouldn't be doing the work that you're doing today. And so it is such a gift. And to be able to look back and see those struggles as the most precious gifts in our life and take them as learning, as opposed to, holding on to the view that it's going to drag me down the rest of my life. It's such a shift in consciousness. And I think, I want to give that gift to everybody. So
Cool.
as far as you, transmuting this trauma into learning through plant sacrament, like what I'm curious to know, like what from your internal experience in your plant sacrament practice, like what sort of visions did you have that brought you to this understanding?
Well, I think, healing first starts with healing your own conception of who you are. And so when I think about my first week of ayahuasca journeys, I've said my whole adult life, I've had occasional recreational use of psychedelics, mostly LSD and psilocybin, a little bit of MDMA. I've grown psilocybin in the distant past and had a very special relationship with that fungus, and grown cannabis in the distant past as well, and had a special relationship there. So it wasn't like the prior use was just all going to shows and rocking it out. I mean, there was a spiritual element to it. Actually, what I should say is that the first ceremony that I did was around 5-MeO DMT. And that was what led me to ayahuasca. Now, 5-MeO is a total dissolution of ego.
Yeah, you went hard at first.
God, that was, really, again, I'd done lots of psychedelics in the past, but in terms of what I would say about, and the reason I brought it up is because to do it in the ceremonial context with a legitimate medicine person who knows how to hold space and move energy and facilitate healing was a total revolution for me. And, that is what the game changer is, the container that the psychedelics were kept in. I mean, again, I'd done it and, watched beautiful documentaries and videos that are profound, like Baraka and all these beautiful documentaries that you can watch on psychedelics that are very visually stimulating. So it wasn't like there was no spiritual element to the past, but doing it in this spiritual container, just, what I felt was this connection to this ancient community. And again, hearkening back to my own Celtic indigenous roots, that was a ceremonial based society, that was earth based. I think that's what so many Americans are missing, is this sense of, a truly emergent, profound, in the moment experience with God that is connected to a lineage that we, now we're adopting other people's lineages because the European lineages have been broken. But that first 5-MeO was like, oh my God, this is the only way psychedelics should be done. Now, again, I think since that time, I'm a little more open to other ways, but that's what I felt. I was like, this is the only way to do it, because this is where you find true connection to divinity, to community, that where you're supported by the circle. And so from there, I went to Costa Rica and did ayahuasca. And I was going to start by saying, real healing comes from healing who you are, your conception of yourself, because I think that first week I did 4 ceremonies in a week. And the center I went to is very good about setting your intentions for you. And so I had, I was going through the trauma at that time, the alienation and the separation from my children had started. But the first insight was that, go back to who you were as a child. I was a really sweet boy. I mean, that's, who I was. I was the youngest of 3 children, and reconnecting with that inner child and, meeting that child in ceremony and remembering the core of who you are and seeing that still be part of who you are now is so empowering and so powerful. And so that was one of the first insights. And then I also, in that first week of ceremony, saw my rebirth. I saw my mostly undifferentiated consciousness before this lifetime. And I saw what the center that I went to, the guy that started it. I don't want to give him a plug because there's a lot of good centers down there, but he was from the same town I was. And in the ceremony, what I saw was a recreation of my hometown and the vortex of where both the founder and I were born. He was in the room that night. And it was like so ironic that I could literally, we were in Scranton, Pennsylvania, this tiny coal mining town in Pennsylvania. And I saw the consciousness might come back into this lifetime. And it was one of those moments where it's like, oh my God, you know, this other place we're going after death and the place I was before I was born, that was beautiful. I love that place. It was the most wonderful place ever. We were in community because we were interconnected and we were undifferentiated. And it was the universe was singing, and it was part of like a tribal community of, you know, almost like indigenous consciousness. And again, I have Celtic indigenous roots. And so, I mean, I'm just saying it was that moment when it really put me at ease about the death process. It was like, wow, there is nothing to fear about death. We're going to a better place, you know, not a better place. We're going to a good place. This is nothing to be afraid of. So, you know, those were some of the early insights that have really grounded me into the certainty of who I am. But, you know, I've probably done ayahuasca 20 times now, not a ton, but that's a good amount at this point in my life. And in those journeys, the vast majority, I've never had a bad one. I've had many beautiful experiences or revelations. I mean, the connection with nature for me is so elemental, and you know, the deep respect for Mother Earth and the translation of that into how we treat ourselves. I had a vision one time that the earth had consumed my stomach and was interwoven with my organs. And, you know, basically what that was showing me was that everything you put into your body, I mean, this body is a sacred temple. It's part of the earth, and you should never put junk in that thing. That, you know, you make that commitment to yourself that I will not eat that fried whatever. I mean, again, there's exceptions. You can cheat here and there, but for me, it was like this deep commitment to healthy food. And that I'm so interrelated with the earth. And that's why we have to keep the earth clean to, you know, make sure we're eating clean food. And so there's revelations like that. There's been a deep connection to the dead in my experiences. Yeah, I would say the South American experiences have been much more profound than the ones that have maybe been in the United States. But also the ones in the US have been profound. But the thing about the ones in South America is I had just in the Amazon with all that life and jungle all around you, you know, I've really been able to connect to spirits of ancestors and maybe future life entities. But I got to hold my grandmother and grandfather's hand in the grave in a very beautiful way that was not creepy at all. And it was very nice to be with them. And I had their energy, you know, seeing their energy still manifest within me, this visceral feeling of connection to ancestry, kind of like what I was talking about earlier about this line of consciousness that there's no doubt my grandmother and grandfather are still within me. I mean, I'm part of them. I'm 1/4 my grandmother, right? You know, I'm 1/4 my grandfather. So just, you know, and that helps you stay connected to those ancestors, gives you a sense of security in who you are. And also more putting at ease with the death process. I would say that's been a big part of it. But yeah, you know, just recently, I would say that I had a ceremony that I've had lots of insights on my children and, you know, lots of healing for them, sending them lots of love. And that's been profound for my father, who's been sick a lot lately. But beyond those sort of articulable experiences, I would just say that, some of my top experiences, I was mentioning this recent experience, it's just been that beautifully pure, cleansed consciousness, that pure light, like purity that you can achieve in an ayahuasca ceremony when the conditions, set and setting are all right. I agree that long term, in terms of my spirituality, I don't need psychedelics to have a spiritual experience. It's kind of a shortcut. It gets you there right away. But most people will meditate their whole lifetime and maybe only have flashes of this. Mm-hmm. And for me, at least, to have that direct, pure consciousness, divine experience is critical. And I think I will want to have that periodically for some period of years. And I guess my point is just to have that pure divine encounter and to feel the presence of the greater undifferentiated consciousness all around us, and to feel loved in that, and to feel protected, and to feel healed, and to feel released, and to feel that, ayahuasca is a ritual thing and ceremony, to feel that you're contributing to others' healing. Just for me, it's a foundation of my life. I feel like I have a community in those people. We think alike. We're trying to work on making the world a better place, treating each other right, eating healthy food, exercising, being conscious of social justice, all the things that I care about live in that community really strong. And so I love this emerging culture of ceremonial psychedelic use in the United States because it's filled with the most amazing people. They're all musicians and artists, and all of us can be that, even if we have a day job. And watching people play music or read poems or play handpan or play bowls or any of the things I've seen in ceremony, these hybridized, westernized ayahuasca ceremonies that are happening in the US. It's so wonderful and meaningful to me. And many of us are longing for that sense of community. And you can find it if you're open to this in the psychedelic community. So did I go on long enough? I mean, that's a lot, but that's a lot of the main experiences I've had.
No, that's great. And I feel like I know you so much better after this. It's really a brief conversation with you,
Yeah.
and having only experienced you in Zoom meetings and, for the psilocybin panel, I feel like I know you so much. And, I can't wait to get together with you in person because there's so many rabbit holes that I want to take this conversation down. And I can't wait to have that experience, to share actual physical space with you, Sean. So I want to say thank you for coming on the show today, and thank you for being so vulnerable and for sharing what you did. The thing with the podcast is we put these messages out there and then we just don't know how far those ripples go.
Right, exactly.
There are going to be people that you're never going to meet in your lifetime that are going to benefit from what was said here today. And so I just want to say thank you for being a contributor to all of this, and thanks for coming on.
Well, Shane, thank you, because you also have given a lot of yourself and shown a lot of leadership and are living an example. I know none of us are perfect and we're all still works in progress, but from what I know about you, bud, we got to spend some time together, and let's find the time. Maybe the Telluride Mushroom Festival. I'm trying to get a little group of the activists to go in August. I think Kevin and I are speaking there. We can talk about that later, but thank you for having me on the podcast and for all you're doing. And anybody can reach out to me, McAllisterGarfield.com, Sean at McAllister Garfield. Look up Sean McAllister, cannabis lawyer, Sean McAllister lawyer, Denver. You'll see me.
All right. Thanks, Sean.
The Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.